Today we are talking about fish types and cooking methods. By the end of this video, you should have a pretty good idea of how to cook any fish. Yes, even fish you haven't seen before. This video covers fin fish. In other words, these guys, not those. So Ellen asked this question. I'm traveling a lot and like to cook in my Airbnb apartment. So if you will explain how can I cook the fish I see first time in my life, it can be great. For example, ask the seller, is it ocean fish or river fish? And use your thermometer. Actually, it's none of the above. There is no major culinary schism between ocean fish and river fish. What makes the biggest difference is the texture of the fish. And believe it or not, I don't use a thermometer. What? I know, normally I am all about precision, but that's exactly why I'm against the use of thermometer when it comes to fish, at least most fish. Don't worry, I'll explain. We have a lot of ground to cover in this video, so let's get started with fish types. What makes one fish different from another? It's three things: texture, fat content, and thickness. Texture is the most important factor in choosing your cooking method, so that's where we'll start. Here is the spectrum of fish textures from super fragile to super firm. Some fish are quite predictable. Cod is fragile, swordfish is firm, but some fish vary depending on their size, season, and the exact species. For example, wild striped bass is sometimes right in the middle and sometimes moderately firm, while little farm-raised striped bass is usually quite delicate. Luckily, the only time you can get into serious doo-doo with choosing your cooking method are the extremes of this texture spectrum. Never grill fragile fish. They'll just fall right through. Yes, I know you could wrap them in foil and put them on the grill, but that's not really grilling, that's baking on the grill. If you really want to grill those fish, you have to grill them whole. This way, they stay put together as a package. When grilling delicate fish, make sure you grill them with the skin. A skinless salmon fillet might meet the same unfortunate fate on the grill as cod, but with the skin, it usually comes out unharmed. Of course, the easiest fish to grill are these ones. They stay together, they don't flare up too much. Basically, if you are new to grilling, start with swordfish, mahi, tuna, thick striped bass, and if you need any help with grilling fish, check out my fish grilling video linked below. The other extreme of this texture spectrum really does not like wet cooking methods, in other words, poaching and steaming. You know, a poached swordfish is as appetizing as a poached ribeye steak. Basically, it's disgusting. So if you're dealing with mahi, groupers, swordfish, tuna, marlin, just please stay away from wet methods. And this wet method ban also extends to brown-fleshed fish like bluefish, mackerel, sardines, herring. They're really yucky if you poach or steam them. Now let's talk about fat content. Have you noticed how the fat content and thickness are completely separate characteristics of your fish? You can have a really thin fillet that is fatty, sardines for example, and a huge thick fillet that is completely lean, like halibut or yellowfin tuna. The fat content of some fish is quite predictable. Farm-raised salmon is always fatty. Cod is always lean. But many fish fall somewhere in the middle, and for some wild fish, especially large fish, the fat content can really vary with the seasons. For example, swordfish can be beautifully fatty in the early fall, but most of the year its fat content falls somewhere in the middle. How do you know how much fat your fish has? Well, you cook it in a skillet, and then you find out how much fat oozed out of it. and then you know for next time. Luckily, most of the time you do not really need to take the fat content into account when you choose your cooking methods. The only things that might not be a good idea is deep frying really fatty fish, like I don't know, deep fried mackerel or sardines seems a little bit too greasy to me. And also when I choose fish for stock, I try to choose fish with low to medium fat content and with very mild flavor, something like hake, cod, haddock, branzino, sea bream, halibut. Those all work really well for stock, and fatty flavorful fish like salmon, bluefish, mackerel, I don't know about that. I would save those for something else, not making stock. For grilling, if you're grilling fillets, it's best to choose fish that has at least a little bit of fat content so that the fish doesn't dry out on the grill. If you're grilling a completely lean fish, grill it whole if the fish is small, like red snapper, or grill it in steak form if the fish is large, like halibut. Because even the fish whose flesh is completely lean have a little bit of fat content around the skin and bones. You also want to be careful with grilling fish that are extremely high in fat. Things like salmon, Chilean sea bass, they have a tendency to flare up on the grill, so watch them like a hawk. As soon as they brown, you have to drop the heat, otherwise everything will just go up in flames. Now let's talk about thickness. 123 Gregor writes, fish come in so many different thicknesses, different thickness along the same fillet, etc. I find it almost impossible to get cooking times right. How? Ah, yes, if only fish came in perfect boxy shapes. How easy our cooking life would be. Well, steaks sometimes do, right? But fillets, never. That's why you grab your knife and you cut them into sections of relatively even thickness. This way I can take that thin belly off the heat earlier. Obviously, don't get carried away with this or you'll chop up your fish into tiny little pieces. If I am cooking a small and thin fillet like trout, I leave it all in one piece. But even its thickest part cooks so fast that the belly doesn't overcook much. Now that we figured out the fish types, let's talk about the cooking methods. Sear in the skillet and then finish in the oven is the most versatile way to cook fish. Absolutely all thin fish can be cooked this way. If your fish fillet is thicker than 1 inch in the thickest part, it might not cook through by the time it is brown. So in that case, always have the oven preheated to about 400 degrees so that you can pop that skillet right in the oven and finish cooking that fish gently without drying out its surface. When in doubt, use a non-stick pan because most fish are very sticky. Only the firmest fish can be seared in a stainless steel skillet without jumping through some serious hoops. Yes, there are ways to make your stainless steel skillet less sticky, but they're somewhat annoying and not really foolproof. If you really don't like using non-stick cookware, try very well seasoned cast iron. That will also give you a pretty easy release. If I'm faced with a fish that I've never seen before, the first thing I do to it is sear it in the skillet. This will give me everything I need to know about this fish. I'll see how much fat oozes out, so I'll be able to judge the fat content. I'll see what texture the fish has after cooking, so I'll know for next time if it's a good candidate for grilling or not. Searing can be done on fish with and without the skin. Below this video, I'll link to 2 seared dishes, striped bass with the skin and swordfish without the skin, and you can use those basic techniques on any fish. Pan frying is just like searing, but with a coating. My favorite coating is sliced almonds. I can't tell you what a crowd pleaser this method is. It actually has a few advantages over searing. Because the fish does not touch the skillet directly, you can use any skillet. Yes, even stainless steel. I personally don't mind non-stick cookware, but I know many people do, and so it's good to have that option. Not allowing fish to touch the skillet directly has another benefit. You might have noticed that seared fish tends to stink up your place a little bit unless you have a really good hood over your stove. Even perfectly fresh fish that smelled like nothing when it was raw will smell a little bit when you start to sear it. But pan frying usually smells way less because the fish doesn't touch the skillet directly. The best candidates for pan frying are thin fillets with thin skin. My two absolute favorites are trout and Arctic char. Arctic char is kind of like a small salmon. And you could also use white, mild fish without the skin, like fluke. Broiling is great for fatty fish like salmon, Chilean sea bass, sable. Oh, they're fantastic. I particularly like them glazed with something sweet and salty, like soy sauce or miso paste. The only thing to be aware of with broiling is that not all broilers work well. Generally, gas ones brown way better than electric ones. So try broiling in your oven and see how well it's working out for you. You control the intensity of the heat by how close you are to the heating element. Start at 4 inches away from the flame and move closer if you need to. But if you find that you are consistently getting overcooked fish by the time it finally browns, even on thick fillets, then it might be time to give up on your broiler and try something else. We already talked about grilling when we talked about fish textures, so let's move on to sous vide. I was completely indifferent to lean white fish. Cod, haddock, hake, all the stuff that we call scrod in New England. Boring. Until I discovered sous vide. It is really the best way to cook lean white fish. In case you've never heard about sous vide is putting food into a bag and cooking it in a temperature-controlled water bath. And the tool you need for that is an immersion circulator. Lately, they've been very affordable and have been taking the world of home cooking by storm. All those other wet cooking methods, poaching, steaming, baking in parchment, they produce wet fish. Sous vide produces moist fish, and there is a difference. Moist fish has moisture inside and wet fish has moisture outside. Whenever you're poaching or steaming, by the time that fillet, especially on thick fish, has cooked through, most of the moisture has oozed out and the outside of the fish is somewhat dry. Sure, it's wet, but dry. So sous vide solves that problem beautifully. Most of the time, I don't even sear the fish after I cook them sous vide. But if you wanted to sear, just drop the water bath temperature to about 121 Fahrenheit from the usual 131 Fahrenheit. Otherwise, your fish will be falling apart before it even hits the skillet. Another really great way to finish a piece of beautiful white fish that you cooked sous vide is to top it with some buttery breadcrumbs and pop it under the broiler for just a minute, just to let those breadcrumbs brown. If you watch my fish videos, you might have noticed a very conspicuous absence of baking. Oh, that's because I very rarely bake fish. Baking, it's kind of not here or there. If I want bold and flavorful, I sear, pan fry, grill, broil. If I want clean and pristinely pure fish, then I sous vide. But there is one dish where I do bake the fish. Bluefish with crispy potatoes. In that dish, the potatoes provide that browning and crispness, and bluefish provides the deep ocean flavor. The fish bastes the potatoes with its juices as it cooks, making the whole thing simply incredible. This dish is really best made with bluefish, but if you don't have access to bluefish, then mackerel works really well too. And if you want a milder option, try halibut steaks. Though, of course, now that I have an immersion circulator, it's so much tastier to sous vide that halibut and just simply place it on top of potatoes rather than bake it. Now that we've talked about what to do with fish, let's talk about what not to do. Baking fish in parchment or foil is so popular with home cooks that I thought I should warn you about how risky those methods are. That stupid package makes it almost impossible for you to test your fish for doneness. So you're really going by timing here. In other words, most of the time you will not be lucky and will be eating either overcooked or undercooked fish. If you want to do something in a pouch, at least try sous vide. There you can't go above the temperature that you set on your immersion circulator. Regardless of the cooking method you choose, what really makes or breaks your fish dish is doneness. Remember that fish will continue to go up in temperature once they are off the heat for about 5 minutes, so you need to take that into account. And take the fish off the heat when it is still raw inside. The only exception to that rule is the sous vide method. For all the other methods, pull apart the flakes and check if the fish is still translucent in the center. And if you're dealing with a really dense fish like swordfish, then you simply cut into it and check if about, I'd say, 25% of your fish still looks translucent. Why not use a thermometer? Because most fish are too thin and too uneven for you to stick a thermometer into them sideways and get an accurate reading. Sure, you might use a thermometer and get some number, but that number could be very misleading. So it's almost best to trust your eyes than to trust a thermometer. Another problem with the thermometer is that different fish taste best at different temperatures. There is no one temperature at which all fish taste good. So unless you want to memorize temperatures for different fish, it is again best to just dig in. The only time I do use a thermometer is on monkfish. Monkfish is very dense and it doesn't flake at all. Its texture is almost like chicken. And monkfish is very thick and cylindrical. So sticking a thermometer into monkfish works very comfortably, at least into its thickest parts. So a thermometer works great. But everything else, I open it up and take a look. A good time to start checking your fish is at 6 minutes per inch of thickness in the thickest part, and from there on just test it every 1 to 2 minutes depending on how close you are to that desired texture. It is always safer to undercook than overcook. If you check it too early, you can always cook it more, but if you check it too late, there is no undo button with cooking. And I forgot to mention the temperature for monkfish. Since I use a thermometer for that, I take it off at 125 Fahrenheit, and during that 5-minute rest, it usually goes up to about 135 Fahrenheit. If you want in-depth tutorials on all the fish cooking methods that I've mentioned in this video, check out the links below. And if you are ever in the Boston area, maybe I'll see you in my fish class.